This is a 1939 Harley-Davidson WLDR 45 cubic inch factory race bike. WLDR makes great horsepower over the standard 45. I've got 19-inch Kelsey Hayes wheels on it, and this is a replica Harley 45 fender. But the fender looks kind of good from the side, but when I come around to the back, you'll see that it's too wide, doesn't have the right arch for this tire. I'm going to remove the brace from this fender. I'm going to narrow the fender. I'm going to redo the brace. I'm going to re-arch the fender. Then I'm going to rivet the fender back to the brace and put it on this bike, and you'll see from start to finish how much better what I do makes this look than it does right now. From the side, the fender looks good, but as I come around the rear, you can see how much wider the fender is than the tire. I'll drill these rivets out and get the brace off and get the brackets off the fender. And once I get everything off of it, I can cut it and narrow it. I drill the back of these rivets out and knock them out with a punch. This is my fender brace, and I'm gonna take 1 7/8 inches out of the middle of this brace. I got my fender brace cut. I've got it clamped up here in this small drill press vise. And now I'm gonna TIG weld it and go fit it to the bike and make sure it fits the way I want it to. So I've marked the center section I'm gonna take out of my fender with a Sharpie and some tape. I just use the tape as a guide for my lines. I'll check and make sure that I have even lines all the way across this fender before I cut it. Make a nice clean cut, and it'll give me a clean weld when I'm done. This is always my favorite part. Now I got my two fender halves. I'm going to clean up these edges at the joint here, clamp it together, and I'm going to start tack welding it together, and that'll be my narrowed fender. So I start to get this fender tacked together. I'll come back down the line and I'll tack about every inch. And I'm going to flip it over and tack weld the inside. Then I'll run down and TIG weld a solid bead all the way down the inside of the fender and the outside of the fender. Then I'll show you how I finish it out. I'm just doing a real light fusion TIG weld here, no filler rod. I got the welder set at 30 amps. I probably weld about 20 amps. I got a filler rod in my hand in case I hit a spot, but it's got such a nice tight seam that I shouldn't need any. All the big bumps you see in the welds are the tack welds that I welded over as I'm doing my fusion weld. I'm just running down this seam here. Keeping the current light keeps a lot of heat out of the fender. You can see I have a real narrow, about 1 inch wide heat affected zone is what that discoloration is called. Real light heat means I don't warp or distort the fender too much. I'll flip it over and do the underside, and then I'll hammer this out. I got this fender all welded together, a really nice tight TIG weld, and I just hit it with the belt sander to smooth the top out because there was bumps where the tack welds were. In a casting, you pour liquid metal in a mold, and when the metal solidifies, you have your casting, but it's porous and it's not very dense and has weaknesses to it. And a weld is really just a casting that you're doing without a mold. I'm gonna hammer this weld joint in this metal hammer here. It'll smooth out my weld, and it'll also compress that casting, make it more dense. It'll cold work it, which will make the metal stronger, give me a really strong bond. This fender will never split down the middle. The metal hammer makes pretty quick work of that weld seam, makes it a much stronger joint, and takes out any high-low spots that may be in the fender. It's called planishing. It really smooths it out, gives me a nice fender to work with. Here's the narrowed fender on the WLDR. I haven't fastened the fender to the brace yet, but it's just sitting on there for mock-up purposes for me to make sure it's exactly what I want. But compared to the way it looked before, it's clear that the fender looks so much better on this tire.